president of the Science Policy Initiative here at UVA. We're a graduate student organization mostly focused on professional development for graduate STEM students who are interested in science policy career pathways. And this is only our first year. We actually haven't even been around for an entire year yet, so we're excited to be able to pull this off in our first year, as well as many other events we've had throughout the year. And that is thanks to a lot of support we've had here at UVA and at other universities, and I want to thank all those people that have been involved. Firstly, the Jefferson Scholars Foundation, who has generously supported this entire event. They couldn't be here today, but we want to thank them especially. Dr. Phil Trella and his Office of Graduate Students and Postdoctoral Affairs has been tremendously important in putting together this event, as well as several others we've had throughout the semester. Amy Klobes in the School of Engineering, who's also helped us organize these events. Tom Katsouleas, our academic provost, has also been a great mentor and support, and it just goes to show the administrative support we've had within the university. And then all of the students who coordinated and helped make this event possible, if you guys would stand up, I think everyone should have a blue ribbon on your name tag. So these are the people you can seek out today and ask questions. If you have questions about the event or about our organization, they'd be happy to chat with you. We're also going to have a poster out there during the poster session if you want to come talk to us during that time as well. Can we give all of them a round of applause, please? Thank you, guys. And then, of course, all of our speakers who have generously volunteered their time to come be with us. We have an awesome lineup of speakers. I hope you're as excited about it as I am. So we really want to thank them for volunteering their time and being here with us today. So can we give them a round of applause, too? So hopefully you've gotten a chance to network a little bit already and realize that we have students not only from the University of Virginia, but from many universities across the East Coast and the country. So we are really excited to talk to you. If you have a student organization at your university or are interested in starting one, we would love to chat with you about some things we could do collaboratively or how you could host similar events. Like I said, we'll have a poster during the poster session. Please come talk to us sometime during the day. A little bit of logistics for the poster session. It's going to be from 12 to 1:30, sort of concurrently with lunch. So take your time, grab lunch, network, go see the posters, talk to everyone. If the poster presenters, if you could get your lunch and be at your poster around 12:30 so people have a chance to come talk to you for about an hour. And use that time to talk to the speakers, network. Not all of them can stay for the networking time this afternoon, so make sure you grab them if you get a chance during lunch to talk to them as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Phil Trella, who's our Assistant Vice President for Graduate Studies.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Michaela. I am really happy to be here today, and I am incredibly impressed with the crowd that I'm seeing and with all the speakers that have come to UVA and to Charlottesville today for this really unique and incredible event. I understand that this event is a testament to the power of fondue and what happens when a couple of people have a really good idea and are motivated to take that idea and see what they can do to it. So I want to thank especially Michaela Ricard for her leadership in this area. Without Michaela's hard work, she said that our office has been, instrumental in helping to organize these things. But in truth, all we have done is sit on the sidelines, help as we can, and cheer her and her group on. So I want to give a loud round of applause to Michaela and the leadership that she's shown with this initiative. And to all the organizers. Later this evening, I've been asked by the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences Student Council, maybe some of you will be there, to come and give a talk on leadership to their council group. And I will use this opportunity as a real example of how graduate students have the power of leadership to really change their own community and to foster their own development. Michaela's and the Science Policy Initiative's work comes at exactly the right time for the University of Virginia. As Michaela mentioned, I'm part of the Provost's office, and our Provost, Tom Katsouleas, is really an incredible supporter of thinking about how to foster career and professional development for graduate students and PhD students. One of the things that we know about PhD students in STEM especially is that the majority of PhD graduates go on to do jobs other than being tenure-track faculty members. More importantly, what we know about PhD graduates in STEM is that the majority prefer to do something other than being tenure-track faculty members. And those ideas and those notions of what it is that you want to do with your career changes over time, right? Now, of course, the professoriate has an incredible obligation, and we have a real obligation to train at major research universities the future professoriate. We're sort of solely responsible for that, right? And so we want to make sure that we are doing that as best as we can. But at the same time, we live in a world where we know that most of the complex problems that we are facing today will need to be solved by people like you, and will also need to be solved by people who are both within and without the professoriate, people who are keenly aware and equipped with the kinds of skills and competencies that will allow them to tackle major complex social problems, right, in a collaborative way, and in a way that will cross multiple disciplines. So I can't speak highly enough for, I think, the important work that all of our speakers are doing here today, and sort of Michaela's intuition in terms of putting this group together and the importance that it has for UVA at this point in time. As we move forward, one of my primary goals, the primary goal of my office, and indeed one of the provost's primary goals, will be to do what we can across the university to replicate this kind of initiative and to help foster career and professional development of all of our PhD students, so that as you're moving along and developing your deep disciplinary expertise and developing those abilities to solve those problems, that we are all, that we are also making available to you training in the kinds of competencies and skills that will allow you to do in a really elegant way the kinds of things that many of our speakers who you'll be hearing from today have been doing for a long time. So we want to learn from their experience. We want to hear what their work is like. We want to find out what's important to them. We want to take every advantage to network with them and learn what are the kinds of skills and things that they think are important for them to do their job. So without further ado, I want to move into our program and our first speaker and get this kicked off with Mr. Bill Bonvillian, who will be joining us here on stage for his talk. Bill Bonvillian is a lecturer in MIT's Science, Technology, and Society and Political Science departments. He is an advisor on research projects at MIT's Industrial Performance Center and a senior director at MIT's Office of Digital Learning. He has been writing about advanced manufacturing since 2012. Oops, I lost my spot here. Was an advisor to MIT's Production and the Innovation Economy study issued in 2013 and participated for MIT in the Industry University Advanced Manufacturing Partnership and its reports. Prior to MIT, he served for over 15 years as a senior policy advisor in the U.S. Senate working on innovation issues. He serves as the AAAS Committee on Science, Engineering, and Public Policy and on the board of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. And I understand that we will be doing our best to steal the syllabus that he has created for MIT Science Policy Bootcamp, which we are going to be trying to put together here at UVA this winter for the very first time. So without further ado, thank you, Mr. Bill Bonvillian, for joining us today.
Does this sound okay? Does this work? I want to kind of give you a glimpse of the kind of big picture of U.S. R&D and innovation organization, with particular focus at the federal government level. Shortly after I started working at MIT about 12 years ago, I had a meeting with some graduate students, and they figured out that I had been involved in working on a lot of the legislation in the R&D space over years at the U.S. Senate, and that I had done some teaching at another university on these topics, and they began pushing me to develop sort of a short course at MIT on these topics. And I couldn't figure out why they were interested. I mean, these were scientists and engineers, largely in PhD programs. Why would they care, right? What was their concern? And they essentially explained to me that they didn't study that stuff. It was not in the curriculum. And yet, they were going to be thrown into this system, and whether they were going to be successful in finding research projects, whether they're going to be successful in finding employment positions either inside or outside the academy was going to largely depend on this black box around R&D systems that they hadn't been told about. And in effect, they pushed me and really helped me design the course at MIT to try and open the lid on the black box a bit and try and understand some basics about how this system works. So in talking to Michaela and Courtney, they've asked me to kind of do something like that, an extremely short version of that today, to kind of, start opening a glimpse into the black box of innovation organization. So I'm going to talk about, several topics. First, why innovation policy? And I want to draw particularly on growth economics and the connection between growth economics and the innovation system. I want to make an analogy to Bell Labs and the way in which that was organized as a comparison point, and then look at 5 periods of U.S. innovation organization, periods where there was significant change introduced into that system. So in the immediate post-World War II period, the whole Sputnik period, post-Sputnik period, the competitiveness period of the 1980s, and then major efforts at innovation change in both energy and now manufacturing. And I'm going to argue that there's a kind of a fundamental divide in the design of U.S. R&D agencies. We had a very connected model, very integrated model during World War, which evolved during World War II. And then at the end of the war, we disconnected that model. And to some extent, the history of U.S. R&D agencies and of the federal part of the innovation system is a follow-on effort over decades to do a lot of reconnection in that system. So I'm going to try and lay that out. So part 1, let's look at innovation economics, right? What's the economic foundation behind the innovation system? I'm just going to go through this very quickly just to provide you with a little bit of background, a little bit of grounding in these issues. So on the upper left is Robert Solow, who won the Nobel Prize for essentially developing growth economics theory. And his essential argument is that economic growth is dominated by technological and related innovation. That is 60% more dominant cause of economic growth, over a period of time. That created the whole field of growth economics. That is now widely accepted dogma in the economics profession. We can kind of see it, right? We kind of feel how this works. Think about what happened in the 19th century with the advent of railroads and with the advent of electric power. Those drove huge new features in the landscape of the American economy. And then in your own experience, the IT revolution, and then more lately the biotech revolution, have driven huge changes in the way in which our lives and our economies are organized. So that's what he's talking about. That's technological change driven by technological and related. So it's not just the technology, it's the bundle of stuff around those technologies too that drives that change. And then the second great growth economist is Paul Romer, looking very California in that picture, and he's teaching at Stanford at the time. He argues that, look, behind that technological innovation is another driving factor: human capital engaged in research. And in other words, behind that innovation technology system, there's got to be a strong human capital base, a strong talent base. So those give us 2 direct innovation factors that I would argue you can't do without if you want to construct a strong innovation system. Dale Jorgensen, who's the third growth economist here, kind of proved the model. He looks at the IT revolution in the 90s and traces it back to breakthrough innovations in semiconductors as the core technology. And then around that, applications are piled. That technology sweeps into the economy. It changes the productivity rate, which in turn is directly related to a significant growth in the economy itself, in GDP. So that's the story of the IT revolution in the 1990s. All those things were occurring in that period, and Jorgensen kind of proves the case. So we have two direct innovation factors, R&D and talent. Let me see. There's a third factor here. Another great growth economist, Richard Nelson. Nelson looks at innovation as a complex system. So it's not just isolated factors. It is a system. He argues that it can be evaluated at a national scale, but a regional scale and a local scale as well. But you can do comparative analysis of national economic systems. So the system operates, he argues, at the institutional level. And you can evaluate the strength of an innovation system by looking at the strength of the actors in that system. So you look at the public and private sectors. You look at the firms, you look at the federal government or national government R&D agencies and laboratories. You look at the research support systems that they sponsor at universities and elsewhere. So this mix of public and private actors constitutes this innovation system, and the strength of that system is going to be based on the strength and, importantly, the connectedness of those actors. Okay, so we know three things now, right? You got to do R&D, Solow tells us. You got to have a talent base behind that R&D system. And now Nelson tells us you got to look at it as a system and the connectedness in that system, right? So you can now start looking at any region, any nation, and start thinking about the strength of the innovation system. And it's important because, as Solow told us, technological and related innovation is going to drive your growth rate. It's going to drive your national well-being, right? So these are very important facets to understand and work with. Now, it's a complex system, so there's lots of indirect factors, too. I've just laid out what I think are three direct factors, but there's plenty of indirect factors. Less critical, you still want to get as many of these right as you can. So on the direct government side, university R&D and government labs and education and training and support for industry R&D in the U.S. system, primarily through defense. So those are all direct factors that government tends to lead on. The direct factors the private sector tends to lead on are industry R&D, which is primarily not R, but D. Industry will take something through engineering, prototype, and production stages. Provides a lot of the training. So those are all direct factors, but then there's these indirect factors as well that are important, okay? So fiscal, set by the government, fiscal, tax, monetary policy, trade policy, tech transfer policy, technology standards, intellectual property protection. The list goes on. These are not as critical. You can get some of these wrong. You can't get, I would argue, the fundamental three factors wrong. You've got to get those right. But get as many of these right, and the stronger your innovation system will be. Then on the private sector side, investment capital, angel, venture, IPOs, equity, lending, markets, management organization, the whole compensation system for the talent base. These are likewise kind of, important factors in the mix that are set on the private sector side. And just one more point as we're thinking about innovation theory. This is called innovation wave theory, and it was first developed by a Russian economist named Kondriev back at the beginning of the 20th century. The point here is, think about the IT revolution that you all are familiar with, right? When did it begin? Maybe 1947 with ENIAC, the first mainframe, right? Maybe it began then. But then it takes a very extended period of time before you finally hit a point where it starts to scale up. And maybe that's around 1990. Because then you have semiconductors and you have integrated circuits and microprocessors and you've got the internet and you've got, in effect, a whole communication system. And this thing is starting to scale, and that 10-year period from 90 to actually about 2001 was a remarkable growth period in that sector. So every innovation wave has this. Slow scale up, rapid build up. There is always a bubble, right? Always. So just remember, if you're investing here, be sure to get out in time for this. Okay? That's the dot-com bust in 2001 in the IT sector. And then you go into an extended period of more stable growth. The system is a little more mature. You're weeding out the weaker actors. You go into an extended period of stable growth. Arguably, that's where we are now in the IT revolution. What are these? These waves, they don't collapse, right? They build in a kind of a new mesa in your economy, right? And they add like a big new wedge in your economy. And after 30 or 40 years, you do another one and add another big wedge to your economy. They don't disappear. They just stabilize over time, right? So this is the way economies grow. You keep adding these big wedges of technological advance in these waves, these extended period waves that take decades to evolve, and go add a wedge and then add another wedge and so forth. This is the way economic well-being, occurs in an economy. So I want you to have that picture in the back of your mind because you want to get onto an innovation wave. It's really important in terms of economic growth and therefore societal well-being. All right, let's do an analogy, an organizational analogy with one of the great institutions of innovation that kind of closed down in the course of the last generation with the breakup of AT&T. It was Bell Labs that had an 80-year run. And we are familiar with Bell Labs because it's famous for these breakthrough technologies that evolved out of fundamental research. So Bell Labs brought us information theory, brought us the transistor, it brought us the silicon solar cell, it brought us cell microwave mobile phone systems, it brought us the first communication satellites, it brought us the Horn antenna, which in turn became the basis for radio astronomy. It brought us incredible laser advances, incredible fiber optic advances. Those are some of the technologies. This is Shockley, Bardeen, and Bratton, who developed the transistor, and that's the point contact transistor that these two actually developed. Amazing stuff, right? So we recognize Bell Labs as having this great foundational basic research piece. What we don't think much about is the other pieces that Bell Labs combined with it. Only 20% of Bell Labs was basic research. It had two other much larger pieces in systems engineering and in production engineering and scale-up. So in 1953, Mervyn Kelly, who was responsible for, and this is their facility out in Murray Hill, New Jersey, Kelly was an incredible leader of the lab and created much of what we've been talking about. And he gave a talk to the Royal Academy, and he considered it, and it was a big deal. And his topic was not the great technology advances. It was the organizational model that he and Bell Labs had come up with. And he argued that it was a great model because it was organized to move from discovery systematically to development to manufacture. So that all three pieces were really housed in one place. He called it a living organism that had to be connected, and that he argued that physical proximity, putting everybody here, was crucial to the stages that had to follow on from the basic research. The systems, and particularly the production work, was led by this guy named Jack Morton for a very extended period of time. Jack Morton argued, leading the development parts of Bell Labs, that if you haven't manufactured in a large volume and if you haven't found a large market, you have not innovated. You might as well have done nothing unless you can achieve these two additional steps. And again, Bell Labs was organized to do this. So using the transistor analogy, the first transistor was designed by Bratton and Bardeen as a point contact technology. Shockley shortly thereafter contributes what was called junction technology, a major advance. This technology goes from germanium in 1947, which was found not to be terribly reliable at higher temperatures. They had to invent silicon. In 1952, they began that shift. Look at that time period, right? And then it took years to learn how to clear out silicon's impurities. They had to invent a whole diffusion process, a whole technological process, in order to make silicon manufacturable and workable at scale. So from that process, in turn, silicon's sensitivity to light began to be understood. And there was a team at Bell Labs that actually creates the first solar cell, 1955, right? So you begin to get a sense of the time periods that are required here, even in this highly integrated atmosphere that Bell Labs had. And interestingly, the Defense Department provides the initial market. So there's integrated discovery, development, and production linked together. All right, so I want you all to hold on to that idea. And then we're now going to look at the federal system and how that evolved and how that's organized. So we're going to look at those 5 periods. And I'm going to go through these quickly. We can come back to them more if you want to in Q&A. First, the immediate post-war period. And science policy usually starts with Vannevar Bush, and sure enough, there he is. He's Franklin Roosevelt's science advisor during World War II. And then at the end of World War II, when the entire military machine was being dismantled and the research system that had built up in the course of the war along with it, Vannevar Bush persuades Roosevelt, look, let's hang on to some of this. Let's hang on to early stage research. And he writes an advocacy piece called Science, the Endless Frontier, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. And that's not like a white paper. That's just a sheer advocacy piece. He is making a case for federal investment in research. And that model that he creates in that advocacy piece really becomes the basis for organizations like the National Science Foundation, the Office of Science, the Department of Energy, NIH, and so forth. That's the defining document. And he argues in this piece, and gets Roosevelt to go along, that we're going to do 4 things in the United States. 1, we're going to have a war against disease. And both Bush and Franklin Roosevelt and others saw the incredible gains in medicine in World War II. Antibiotics was the critical factor. It radically reduced death by disease. It moved pneumonia from the biggest killer way down the list. It was an amazing thing. And they were just fighting a war. We don't have to fight that war anymore. Let's have a war against disease. So that's argument kind of number 1 on this argument for basic research. We're going to need national security. This was not a hard sell. The American public had seen things like radar, early electronics, atomic weapons. They understood the power of technology for national security. Third argument is, this was the important one, what he called public welfare. The big anxiety at the end of World War II, when he's writing this for Roosevelt in 1945, is that, we've got 20 million troops returning home. We're dismantling the wartime economy. Are we going to go into a depression? That was an operating assumption, right? And Bush is arguing, speaking to this big public anxiety about what's going to happen. Bush argues, wait a minute, invest in R&D, and we're going to have public welfare. We're going to have a strong economy. This science's role is to add value capital to the innovation system, and that's why it was so crucial, is his point. The 4th point he makes is that the talent point, that Paul Romer point. We also have to nurture talent. We're not going to have a strong system without a talent base. And he argues that there's a governmental support role for science talent. So he has a pipeline theory of innovation. His idea is government dumps basic research in one end of the pipeline. mysterious things occur, and then out of the end of the pipeline come a war against disease, full employment, economic well-being, and national security, right? We're going to get all that stuff, right? Just dump research at the end, mysterious things will occur, and we'll get that out, right? That's the model, right? And look, we've gotten a tremendous amount out of that model. It's been extremely productive for us. But the model embodies, another phrase I'm sure you've heard, the valley of death. In other words, the governmental role is going to be here, and then applied research and the innovations themselves are going to occur over here in the private sector. There's a big gap and fairly few bridging mechanisms. So another way of looking at the pipeline theory is that there's a particularly strong hole at this early stage technology development between what's going on with government research support and then what industry is picking up on these later stages. The biggest critique of Vannevar Bush was by a guy named Donald Stokes of the Woodrow Wilson School. And Stokes he's dying of leukemia, but he wants to get the story out. So this is the last thing he writes. He writes a book called Pasteur's Quadrant. And he essentially argues that Bush, well motivated, has a fundamental flaw in his thinking process because he missed what he calls the Pasteur quadrant. So Bush stands for pure basic research, and industry can pick up the applied research side, but there's a gap here in use-inspired basic research. And he picks Louis Pasteur as the example. Pasteur is doing basic research with a purpose, right? Save kids in Paris from dying of bad milk, right? From this, in effect, epidemic that's occurring. That would be use-inspired basic research. Because Bush didn't contemplate that stage, we missed that in the way in which we organize our R&D system, Stokes argues. All right, that's period one. So we've got a pipeline model. Then we do period two, the Sputnik period. And, you know, Sputnik is a symbol of technological surprise. The U.S. was surprised by a Russian advance in technology that we were not ready for. Behind that, you know, blinking little satellite was an understanding that that is first strike ballistic missile capability. So the stakes are huge here. And the Defense Department could not take a disconnected model. It couldn't tolerate that. In the end, it had to have a much more connected model. It had to really go back to the World War II kind of period of time where it had that connected model. So it plays a role at every part of the innovation pipeline. So you need to keep in mind that the U.S. is running two parallel universes of innovation policy that are very differently organized. So we're running the pipeline model for the civilian R&D agencies, right? But then we're running a highly connected model on the defense side. So, let's go back one. NSF, DOE, Office of Science, NIH support research, you know, to the development stage, maybe into initial prototype. The Defense Department supports the research, it supports the development, it supports the prototype, it supports the demonstration, it supports the test bed, it supports initial production and the creation of an initial market for technology after technology after technology. So we're running these two parallel systems of R&D, a disconnected system and a connected system. This is another great growth economist named Vernon Rutan. He writes a book that's called Is War Necessary for Economic Growth? Because he points out that a huge part of the late 20th century advances, second half of the 20th century, aviation, nuclear power, electronics, space, computing, the internet, These are the big innovation waves. Remember innovation waves? These are the big innovation waves that evolve in the second half of the 20th century. And they are predominantly supported by that defense innovation system, the connected kind of model. So DARPA is an example of that connected model. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it was created to avoid technology surprise. It is a different kind of innovation organization. It's organized to create great groups of innovators, so it's combining not just, it's an institution, but innovation in the end is face-to-face. It's people, right? People innovate, not institutions. And DARPA works hard to get that people face-to-face piece right by operating what others have called great group theory. A system of flat empowered program managers that are very entrepreneurial. They serve 3 to 5 years, which means you've got continuous change coming in the organization. It's a challenge-based right-left model. So DARPA looks to the right about what it wants to get out of the innovation pipeline, then it goes back to the left side of basic research advances to do the breakthroughs that are going to lead to the advances it wants. So it's a much more conscious model. It's a hybrid model because DARPA typically combines academic researchers with small and startup firms, and sometimes larger firms. It's very high risk. DARPA only wants to do revolutionary breakthrough things, so it's prepared to take the risk to get there. That's hard in a public agency. With the defense rationale, DARPA's been able to get away with it. And then it takes advantage of the connections to that DoD system that's prepared to support these technologies through all the different stages, like Bell Labs, right? So, key point, it's a connected model, right-left challenge approach. It's not concerned about incremental advances. It doesn't want to do those. It'll leave those to industry. It wants to do breakthroughs, so it has a system of technological visioning. It wants to envision a technology and then take the earlier stage steps to get there. And it's face-to-face, personal-level innovation great groups. These are breakthrough areas that DARPA supported in the IT revolution. You name it, it's there. I'm not going to go through in detail, but virtually all of the billion-dollar sectors that are in the IT world today, many have origins in DARPA. They contributed stealth, the internet, wireless transmission advances, MEMS, microprocessor advances, desktop computing, supercomputing, robotics, UAVs, precision strike, advances in synthetic biology, computer simulated gaming for training, recently the driverless car challenge. It's a remarkable run. It's a very different kind of organization than the basic research agencies. It's not that one is necessarily better than the other. This one is just different. So, period 3, moving right along, from 73 to 91, the U.S. economy slowed. The historic U.S. GDP growth has been around 3%. Productivity growth has been around 2%, which is the factor behind GDP growth. From 73 to 91, GDP was in the 2% range. Productivity growth fell below 2%. So the U.S. had organized its economy, starting in that post-war period, around leading innovation advances. And we led them all. Except Japan led a quality manufacturing innovation wave, which the U.S. missed. And Japan used that innovation leadership and that innovation wave to capture both consumer electronics and the auto sector predominantly, right? Huge, shocking change to the U.S. And it's in this period, in the 70s and 80s, that the U.S. is realizing that it missed a wave and trying to wake up to what those realities. And if you miss something, it's very hard to catch up. So we did a whole series of steps to, in effect, move that system further down the innovation pipeline. So we did the Bayh-Dole Act, which puts universities into the position of owning federal research results, encouraging the commercialization of that technology. We did the Manufacturing Extension Partnership to bring latest manufacturing technologies, in effect, the quality revolution to U.S., particularly small and mid-sized manufacturers. We did the Small Business Innovation and Research Program, where federal research supports startup companies that are working on technology advances. We did the Advanced Technology Program for high-risk R&D by industry. We did Semitech to restore and keep U.S. leadership in the semiconductor field. So we moved further down the pipeline. These are not basic research. These are stages moving down the pipeline where the U.S. began to organize its innovation system. A little further along. Period 4, energy innovation. I'll go quickly through this. Climate creates forces a significant change in the way in which the innovation system is organized. And the U.S. is pretty good at doing completely new things. We really pursue the next big thing. We are not very good at bringing technology advance back into established parts of our economy. So we're kind of a covered wagon technology culture. We like to jump in our covered wagons and take them west and open up new technological territories, right? Kind of new frontiers of technology. We're pretty good at this. It could be a lot better, but we're pretty good at this. We almost never take those covered wagons west to east, right? That's harder. So we like standing up technology in open fields like computing. There was really nothing like computing before computing. However, innovations like to land in open frontiers. They don't like to land in established neighborhoods. They have to parachute in. And look, they often get shot at on the way down, right? So we're not good at going west to east, at going back over the mountains in the other direction. We'd much rather do biotechnology than fix the healthcare delivery system, right? Yet, there could be huge gains in fixing the old, not just doing the new, right? That's the energy story, right? Energy is a complex, established, legacy economic sector. And in legacy sectors, the new entrant disruptive technologies are up against a technological and economic and political and social paradigm. There are established routine technologies. There are established business models behind those technologies. There is a political support system and often social support systems that protect those incumbent legacy sector technologies. And it is very hard to move a disruptive new technology into those sectors. The American economy is at least 80% legacy sectors, right? So that means we're walling off most of the economy from innovation-driven growth, and innovation-driven growth is the dominant factor in economic growth. So, in effect, we are, in a way, deliberately lowering our growth rate because we haven't been able to deal with this problem. So energy, this is the energy problem, and the Department of Energy has been frantically attempting to move the DOE innovation system much further down the pipeline, to not only retain strong basic research, but to develop the mechanisms that will enable new technologies to move down that pipeline. ARPA-E is probably the most noteworthy example of this effort, in effect an effort to bring a DARPA-type model to the Department of Energy. But all these yellow boxes are new pieces that in the last decade have been added to DOE in an attempt to tackle this innovation organization problem. The last one I want to talk about is advanced manufacturing. We're starting to realize that initial production is a highly innovative stage, that engineering and innovation feedback is a critical element of the whole innovation process, right? And manufacturing, therefore, is part of that innovation system, and there needs to be better connections. So what am I talking about? What happened in manufacturing that's been driving this new set of recognition? So we had a terrible decade in the 2000s, 2000 to 2010. 1/3 of manufacturing jobs ended, about 5.8 million jobs. Plant and equipment investment fell very considerably, and it's still at low levels. Output declined in 16 of 19 industrial sectors in that time period. And if output is lower than we thought, then productivity is considerably lower than we thought, right? So what's going on here is a structural problem in the manufacturing system, and structural solutions aren't fixed by the major policy focus we've been trying to tackle this with, right? You don't fix structural problems alone by trade, tax, regulatory, and currency valuation fixes. There is a deep innovation system problem here, which is what we're coming to understand. So we've put together, in the last few years, 14 new advanced manufacturing institutes. The goal of these is to bring innovation-based efficiency and productivity gains to enable the U.S. to compete with lower wage, lower cost countries. And innovation carries its own rewards. In other words, that will create new technologies, new product lines, and so forth as well. So it's an innovation approach to this deep manufacturing challenge. The manufacturing institutes are kind of like Sematech in a way. They have a testbed role, they have a workforce education role, they're organized around new technology paradigms, they're cost shared so that a federal dollar is matched in almost all cases by twice as many dollars from industry and states. It's a very complex model. They're typically 100 entities, mostly industry as well as universities and community colleges, that are part of each one of these. As a Department of Defense official described it, agencies are used to, putting out basic research grants for $200,000 to a principal investigator. Suddenly, research agencies are having to organize 100 industrial firms of all kinds of sizes in different kinds of sectors, with different kind of business models, with universities, with community colleges. It's a radically more complicated innovation model. It is a much harder task. And this Department of Defense official said, this is like standing up a country, right? It's not like making an R&D award. Here's where the manufacturing institutes are located. Here's the gap that they're trying to fill in the innovation system, right? For those of you who are familiar with the term, these are TRL levels, technology readiness levels 4 through 7. So they're in this place between basic research, proof of concept, and then moving towards production. They're trying to fill that gap with groups of firms that will work together in pre-competitive research to do that. Here's the organizational model. Whoops. Here's the institute with its shared use facilities, prototypes and labs, research facilities, workforce programs, computing and simulation work. Large companies, small and mid-sized companies, and startups feed into this and are participants. Universities, national labs, community colleges are part of this system too. And then the government side, you've got federal money, but also state and local money and economic development organizations feeding in as well. So it's a very complex kind of model, an attempt to create a community with all the players involved, right? Remember innovation systems theory. Get all the players together and connect them, right, towards technological advance. That's the enterprise here. The issue for the U.S. is that at the end of World War II, the U.S. was like king of manufacturing, right? We innovated here, and we produced here, and we got all the gains of every stage occurring in the United States. Then we figured out how to do distributed production, largely through IT advances, so that we could produce here, we could innovate here and produce there, right? And lots of companies did that. The risk here for the U.S. is that that production stage, particularly production of a new technology, very creative work, very creative engineering, very creative production design work, and often you have to completely rethink the underlying science as well to get to that stage, right? That was why the Bell Lab system was such a powerful model. We don't really do that piece very well, right? We don't do that well. And the risk is that if you're going to be producing there, you've got to get that innovation system pretty closely tied to that production system. You're going to start to emigrate the innovation system. If innovation is the strong U.S. suit, and all of you in this room represent that, then the risk here is produce there, innovate there. Right? So that's why these manufacturing institutes represent kind of a new kind of model. I'll skip over some of the details, but let me just do some conclusions and we'll do a little Q&A. So in part one, we talked about innovation economics and the fact that the driver behind technological innovation really is the economic growth and economic well-being of an economy. In the second part, we talked about the Bell Labs analogy, where discovery, development, and production were all integrated in one highly connected facility and set of facilities as a kind of model for doing it right. And we saw that list of incredible technologies that came out of Bell Labs that all scaled, right? They all went into production and implementation. And then we talked about 5 periods of change in the U.S. innovation system. That initial post-war period where we moved from a wartime connected system to more of a disconnected system with a federal research role paramount. And I'm not criticizing this phase. Let me be clear. That fundamental research thing is foundational, right? And we've gotten an enormous amount out of it. But then period 2, Sputnik, where the Defense Department has to really build a much more connected system. And we talked about DARPA as an example of that. And then period 3, the competitiveness period, a series of models to better connect the R&D side to the back end of the system. Period 4 is around the energy challenge. Period 5, which is still ongoing, of course. That's a problem of your time. And period 5 around advanced manufacturing, kind of a new recent attempt to build in a completely different kind of innovation model. All of these stages were driven by external forces, right? External change, forced change in the innovation system. So period 1, in that post-war period, the strength of the innovation system the U.S. built up during the war, we wanted to hang on to that and keep a federal support for research role, and we did. Period 2, DOD rebuilt a connected model. Period 3 was that competitiveness period in the 70s and 80s, competition from Japan and Germany around production really forced a series of new mechanisms further down the pipeline in the U.S. Period 4, the energy challenge, in the end requires a lot more connected system. And sure enough, the Department of Energy has been pursuing innovation organizational models to attempt to do that. In period 5, U.S. is starting to understand that production, not just R&D, is part of the innovation system, and that we've got to get better, particularly at that early stage production moment, by bringing in a whole new set of manufacturing paradigms, in effect creating a more connected model in that early initial production stage. So those are the 5 periods and the kind of drivers that have forced them. Let me close out here and see if we've got some Q&A. We've got about 15, 18 minutes. What do you want to know? Fire away, please.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. And I'm curious about this sort of new model of the advanced manufacturing institute. Is this being tried in other sectors, other industries? You use the example of healthcare delivery systems working. Could we stand this up around healthcare?
Well, interestingly, there are 2 manufacturing institutes that are focused on much better efficiency in the kind of life science production side. So there's an institute organized around regenerative medicine and tissue engineering, which are in effect new processes that are, as you all know, incredibly promising. And how can we actually produce that at a reasonable cost at scale, right? Which are going to solve a whole series of medical issues, it looks like. And then there's a second institute called Nimble, headquartered in Delaware, but really operating across many states. And that's organized around trying to move us from the old batch processing system of drug production to much more efficient continuous production. Big, organizational challenge, big technology challenge, but very promising in terms of the possibility of driving down costs in the drug production side. And innovation carries its own reward. As I said before, innovative processes carry new opportunities too. So to some extent, we are looking at that manufacturing institute model in the context of the life sciences. But you ask a bigger question, right? Can we think about some of the lessons on innovation organization when we think about the challenge of, healthcare delivery? And again, healthcare delivery, as I said earlier, is a classic legacy sector. It's locked into its own routines. It's locked into its existing technologies. It's locked into political support systems. It's locked into major institutions like hospitals. It's hard to bring disruptive change to those systems. Just look how hard it's been to just introduce electronic medical records, right? I mean, we're 25 years into this, and how much progress have we made? I mean, the financial services sector adopted the equivalent of electronic medical records in a matter of a few years, right? Completely transformed that sector, created a globalized financial system. We're still working away at even a fairly basic approach like electronic medical records, much less the data and analytics that would allow us to understand in a much more sophisticated way what that information could lead us to understand. So Robbie Barbero, who is here, is far more expert on this than I ever will be. So let me urge that you hit him with this question when the time comes. But one of the problems with the legislation that we keep battling over and never passing, because it's hard to change an established sector, on the healthcare delivery side, that's all organized around kind of redoing the financial plumbing, right? Innovation has never been a story that has entered into the debate on healthcare delivery, right? And I'd argue that one of the reasons why it's been so hard is that we've never really considered, in a systematic kind of way, looking at the innovation opportunities that could enter that sector and significantly improve its efficiency and performance. So I hope if we have another healthcare policy debate, we do these about every decade, that next time around we might consider a much more systematic look at the innovation possibilities, which in turn make the shift more manageable.
Bill, I'm going to give you one example.
Please.
Well, first of all, to your point that biotech is, innovating in biotech is much easier than in healthcare. My time in policy world, I did no healthcare policy and only biotech policy.
Proof of the case. And Robbie did some amazing things, which I hope he'll tell you about.
But in the Affordable Care Act, there was authorization for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to do innovation pilots. They're called CMMIs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually, nobody knows about this because it is, it's like the 10th most important thing that gets argued about in the healthcare space. But I would encourage all of you to look at that because the CMS actually implemented some pretty interesting pilots to pilot out, the CMS is the biggest payer of healthcare for health services in the country, right? But they're like payment pilots. So they were able to use their role as a payer to try to incentivize some innovations around healthcare delivery with some very, very cool results in that space. And if the Affordable Care Act were repealed, that would go away. And so, if you care about that issue and you think it's interesting, you should definitely look up the CMMI pilots. If you want to get connected to people who worked on those in the past, or still have, still know who's doing that in the government, happy to make those connections.
Thanks, Robbie.
Yep.
Other questions? Please.
Kind of interested in this legacy sector at MIT you have. And so I guess I'm
Well, the manufacturing institutes, this is, in the last few years, we've been working on standing this model up. And it's the first time we've ever really thought systematically about bringing an innovation policy approach into the production side. We just haven't really done this before. So it's, let me just go back to one prior slide. It looks like there's a whole set of new production paradigms that could come to play here to significantly increase the efficiency and performance of the overall system and enable us to do entirely new things. So this wasn't just an idea, oh, let's play with the innovation system. Scientists and engineers have been telling us that there's this whole suite, and this is only some of them, of new stuff that's poised on the edge of the production system to enter that system. So in effect, there are new production paradigms out there. What am I talking about? Production paradigms. So the US in the second half of the 19th century created mass production, right? The ability to produce ever larger lots at ever lower prices, right? Through a whole set of production technologies that came to bear, machine tools and a long list of other things. We created first interchangeable machine-made parts, which actually came out of the defense armories of the 1830s and 40s. And that, in turn, scaled and led to a larger set of systems assumptions. Think, Ford and the Model T production line, right? So that, we did mass production. A set of technologies and a set of process changes and a business model to go with it in tandem. You have to do those three things. But that led to a whole new paradigm of how you produce things. And the U.S. led that. And led it until about 2011 when China became the largest world output producer of manufactured goods. Right? And it was a great paradigm. And it made this country unbelievably rich. Japan figured out the next really big paradigm. Right? They figured out quality production. Right? Ensure quality at every stage. Complete breakthrough. The U.S. missed this. It was very painful for the U.S. in the 1970s and 80s. We lost leadership in two huge sectors. And, that's another example of what a production paradigm, can do for an economy. The scientists and engineers tell us that this stuff is poised, right? We could do digital production or network-centric production and take RFIDs, sensors at every stage and element, every stage of the whole production process, from resource all the way through the life cycle of the product, and make it smart and use big data and analytics to understand each stage and rethink each stage. We could do incredible advances in advanced materials, which I know some of you in the room are working on. We could do nanofabrication, a whole new set of capabilities. We could do something called mass customization. In other words, the story of manufacturing has always been relentless scale up. Right? Suppose we could flip that and do scale down. In other words, could we produce small lots of goods, customer-oriented, customer-designed, at the same price that it takes to produce mass-produced goods? Technologies like 3D printing and a lot of the computer-controlled technologies could enable this, a complete rethink of what manufacturing is. You've heard of local food. This would be like local manufacturing. Right? Distribution efficiency, all kinds of advances potentially available there, and then whole new fields like photonics and power electronics and biofabrication, regenerative medicine and tissue engineering. These whole new fields are out there for potential adoption in the production process that could be transformative. So these are big change agents sitting here. Now, the U.S. is not the only country thinking about this, right? Germany, which is running the largest trade surplus in manufactured goods in the history of the world at the moment and runs huge trade surpluses with Asian countries. And it pays its manufacturing workers 60% more than the U.S. pays its manufacturing workers, right? So the United States has been sitting around thinking for 20 years, we have to lose manufacturing. We have high wages. We have to lose it. Nobody sent that memo to Germany, right? Germany didn't get that memo. It's paying its workers a hell of a lot more. 20% of its workforce is in manufacturing versus 8% in the United States. It's running an incredibly successful manufacturing sector. It's not to say it doesn't face challenges, right? It does. But it's a very interesting story. There may be lessons that Germany can tell us. The manufacturing institutes are largely modeled on what Germany has been doing for a half century with its Fraunhofer institutes, bringing together the innovation system actors, the small firms and mid-sized firms called Mittelstand in Germany, with their large producers, with their engineering and technical university, and for a collaborative kind of model. In a way, we're just picking a page from the rule book that they already wrote. China has announced a massive advanced manufacturing program. The U.S. government is spending about $225 million a year on its manufacturing institutes. China plans to spend $3 billion. It has announced 40 advanced manufacturing institutes. We have 14. In the recent People's Party Congress, they announced they were going to do 96 manufacturing institutes, right? So China needs to do this too because wages have been coming up very significantly. It's not going to be the low-cost producer anymore, right? It's going to have to do this. It knows it and is moving on it. So to some extent, the U.S. has no choice, right? It's going to have to do advanced manufacturing. Is this a good point to close this out? Okay. Thank you all very much.